나무 묘호랭개교 나무 묘호랭개교 나무 묘호랭개교 Okay, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. How are you doing today? I hope you're well. So, we've been talking about many things, and somehow we ended up back at from Nagarjuna's 12 gates to the 3,000 realms. This is a subject, a conception of mind, that the mention of 3,000 realms right away makes some people, some of you, some of me in my past, our minds just goes poof, all over the place, or shuts down, or goes, yeah, 3,000 realms, or what could that possibly be? There goes that Buddhism again with all of its words. So I thought I would equate the 3,000 realms with what the heck is ego. There's a term, psychoanalysts use it in their own way. They have a very simplistic view of how it comes together from the id, the little professor, the this and that. Many intellectuals have, and I don't mean that they're not intellectuals, but what I mean by quote unquote intellectuals is generally we think of intellectuals as people who live in their brain. And they're very earthbound in their thinking. Fine. We live on the earth after all. But Buddhism, as you probably guessed by now, is not earthbound. It is very pragmatic in a social, earthbound sort of way. But that pragmatism comes of a much broader, deeper, more systemic knowledge. And that system isn't earthbound. That system is universe bound. It is all phenomena bound. So it far reaches beyond simple human interaction and behavior, although it affects and conditions all of our experience, behavior, society. Absolutely. That's what Buddhism is for. Where it gets its strength of influence, understanding, purpose, reaches far beyond this brief time-space lifetime that you and I are engaged in. And I say that because, well, you could say, well, religions talk beyond this life and prior to this life, and planets we go to when we die, or believe me, I'm not making this up, or other forms, gardens in the sky and the clouds and whatever. That's not Buddhism. Buddhism is about living this life right now, the one that you have, in the most excellent and complete expression of your potential, what your ability is to experience and do in this life, and how your earthbound life is getting in the way. How and we might call those obstacles, right? or evils or whatever the translations would have us think. The bottom line is we get in our own way. And the older we get, the more we kind of figure this out anyway. But Buddhism really scientifically breaks it down. And the only reason it scientifically breaks it down is because we humans are really hard-headed. And this takes us to the ego. And so why is our samsaric mind, our idea of a self, and beyond the self, ego, so staunch, so immediately ready to react, and cuts us off from real understanding, real insight of the intense beauty of the process we're living in? Believe me, the ego is what gets in our way. And Buddhism is all about tearing that wall down. Of course, if you chant Namo Myoho Renge Kyo, and you really fervently, and this is the key, if you really single-mindedly pursue Buddha while using this mandala as your reflector back into yourself, to your Gohanzan, your Buddha mind, you're doing it all. It will change like right out from under you. And many would say, well, that's fine. I don't need to understand it. I just need it for it to work. But understand that for it to work, you must have that conviction. You must be convinced. You must enter into this practice with the convincing, the conviction, the resolve that this works. Through my practice, Myoho Renge Kyo, with this mandala of my enlightenment, of what Buddha looks like, with the teachings, the Dharma, the thing that puts me within samsara into my Buddha mind. This is the device I'm using, and it's going to succeed. Now, that's a little bit putting the cart before the horse, right? How can I be so convinced and have such deep resolve before I even start? Well, the way to that is A, convince that samsaric ego that there's a lot of evidence pointing to this working. On the one hand, your samsaric mind, got to convince it. And on the other hand, just do it. You will very quickly find that there are compartments of your life that are exploding, slipping away. You may not even notice for a while. So just do it. Just try it. The practice itself will convince you. But beware the ego, because it'll rise up and go, wait a minute, are you trying to replace me? We're not having that. Let me show you all the ways you're wrong. Yeah, we call those obstacles, because our ego, very, very insistent. So I thought, the reason I'm doing this, the reason for this channel is I'm always wanting to demystify this stuff. And I thought this morning, ego might be a good thing to talk about now. And I came up with an example, and I thought, I don't know how old you are, doesn't matter. Let's assume, for the sake of this discussion, that you are a parent and you have two children, a 7-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl. And those of you who are or have been parents, you're probably all sorts of alarms are going off. But hold on. And let's talk about a ball. And you tell your 7-year-old, well, let's see, you're in a discussion with your kids, and they're inquisitive. And the 7-year-old says, "What's an ego?" And you say, "Wow, that's a difficult thing to answer. It's many things." You might go down the rabbit hole immediately of well, that's what you think you are. We'll talk around self. What's a self? What's an I? What's a not I? It's getting wordy again. It's 7 years old. The 12-year-old goes, I know. Yes, I know, you're very advanced. Be quiet, let me talk to your brother. And you say it's a lot of ideas that you have in your head about who you think you are. What do you mean? I'm Tommy. Okay. All right, Tommy. What is a ball? Well, that's left field. The 7-year-old goes, well, probably points to something. That's a ball. Or I have a ball. I have lots of balls. A soccer ball, a baseball, a four-square ball. And now you're looking at the 12-year-old and the 7-year-old, and you're going, where did your idea of a ball come around? What, Tommy, what is a ball? Just describe a ball. It bounces and it's round. Good effort. What else is it? And the 12-year-old chimes in. It's not round, it's spherical. It's a sphere. And the 7-year-old goes, what's a spear? Not a spear, a sphere. This will come in handy later when he learns spelling. But not all balls bounce, Tommy. Well, some bounce more than others. Have you ever seen a billiard ball? What's that, Daddy? Mommy? What's that? The 12-year-old, I know. Yes, I know you know. Let Tommy speak here. And so maybe you have a billiard ball in your show, Tommy, and you drop it on the carpet and it just goes thump. It didn't really bounce, did it? But that's not a ball. Well, yes, it is. It's actually technically called a billiard ball. Well, that's not the kind of ball I know. Exactly. And the 12-year-old goes, the earth is a ball, the sun is a ball, and the 7-year-old now is like a mixture of furious against his smart-ass sister and confused. Okay, so why do I say this little story? This is the beginning of information, collection, identifying, labeling, discriminating. And when you have children, you really learn these lessons much more profoundly than you ever considered for yourself. We, whatever age you are, take for granted a tremendous amount, a huge catalog of pieces of data that we've assembled in an order we're comfortable with in our experience. Because I'll remind you, if you go to the Congo or deep tribal parts of continents in Africa or Brazil, ball may not even be a word that they utilize. Not because of language, but because, of language in a way, the way they describe their experience in their environment. So I'll just digress for a moment to 3,000 realms. When Nagarjuna is taking apart the 12 gates and his idea of emptiness, all the way to Chi-E and his idea of the 3,000 realms in a single thought moment. And when we discuss karma and the coming into being, the idea of energy of formations, when we look at Tommy's ideation and individuation, his data, his information that he calls solid, we can say that's a descriptive portion of what is his self. This very tailored amount of information and the way that it's utilized. And the 12-year-old has a far more complex, much more data around this information that she contains in her identification folder, right? So her self is a different self than his self, just by virtue of the amount of data and information they have constructed in their relationship with their environment, which is the self. But this is an ego. The ego is another emergent property of that creation of self, that identification with the environment of self. The ego is a posture of self that becomes very critical in nature. Not in nature as in out here, the internal nature of our samsaric reality. It positions itself as the holder or divider or ruler of information. This is information I hold to be true. This is information I hold to be unnecessary. And this is information I'll never, ever credit, believe, have, allow to interrupt. And so what do I do with that information that I don't want to represent self? The ego is the part, emergent part, that decides bad. That's the part that demonizes, that makes things look worse than they are because they're bad. I've decided. That's lesser because I have to be above it. Therefore, anything that I don't accept as valid is trash, evil, attacking. Gotta get rid of it. Gotta extinguish it. Right? That's the part of self that's involved in politics, war, challenges of identity. The identity is the collection of data that represents our idea of self. The ego is the defender and promoter of that idea of self. Do you see how these are just multiple layers that keep, right? And we all know or have met or have seen through social media people who are completely ego-driven. They can't even hear basic facts anymore. You can't tell them the sky is blue. They will argue with you. Knowing full well the sky is blue, their ego doesn't reason. It simply says, your opinion must be extinguished. Therefore, The logic in the ego is extremely broken, detached, from the very reality that these people who are completely ego-driven, or those of us who aren't completely ego-driven but have an ego just the same, when you hear somebody say, well, I'm a realist, I live in the real world, so don't tell me about these 10 worlds and the 3,000 realms, you loon. I live in the real world. Well, congratulations. That's the most unreal of worlds there are, because it's completely, utterly constructed by an entity that has no adherence or curiosity or even pleasure in knowing reality. It's enough to drive you mad, isn't it? So, how many realms did we just go through in that last 10 minutes? Or, sorry, maybe 20 minutes. Yeah, so when you look at things this way, I think it becomes easier to understand why Buddhism has so many words. 3,000 realms in a single thought moment. Yeah, I think we can begin to understand that now, right? Even something as simple as a ball. Your mind just now went through dozens of iterations of ball. From the comical to the serious, to Hiroshima, to planetary observations, all over the place. You could just sit in a room full of people and say, hey, everybody, think about ball. Apart from the crass, which also is going to be there. So it becomes a little easier to understand how Buddhism would dissect the very nature of that momentary thought, having so many influences. And that's what realms and worlds and all that talk is about. How we've constructed our idea of our relationship, our selfdom, like a little kingdom of information, and how we've organized it into a sense of being an organizer, as we are, a distinguisher, an identifier, and on top of which we stick an ego, which now has an opinion. An opinion based on this collection of constructed things we hold to be our very identity. And if you take a 1 month, 3 month, or a year sojourn to another country, and you have to adapt to their way of doing things and their way of seeing things and the way they operate, because you have to survive, so you have that exposure alone will influence you, and your data will grow. Your information will grow. And guess what? Your self changes. Influences your ego. And when you return, you're a different person. How did that happen? Well, it happened willingly. It happened because you initiated it. You didn't have to believe that your trip to work and live in Italy for a year would change you. You were just excited about eating different food, going to different shops, maybe learning a new language. You weren't prepared for the intensely different sense you have of living as a human on this planet. It was altered. You willingly altered it, even though you had no idea what it was going to be. You had some clues, but they're superficial. Talk to somebody who's volunteered in very different situations, living situations in different cultures. People who've gone on, like Doctors Without Borders, or what is that organization? Anyway, you understand. They have a uniquely different idea of self. It's more global. It's less singular. So, by that same reasoning, if you're going to practice something that promises you ultimate enlightenment, an explosion of reality that you've never had experienced before, certainly you have to have some degree of confidence and curiosity about what that's going to be. And oftentimes, when we begin to practice Buddhism, this is what we're challenging. We're not saying that we're bad, right? But we already intrinsically know we can be better, that there is more for us to experience. There's more data out there that will explicate a lot of the weirdness that we have, these repeating patterns that we don't like. We'd much rather have patterns that are supportive, enjoyable, relieving. All those words sound a lot like stress, anxiety, pain, sorts of suffering. Some people don't like the word suffering, but somebody disagreeing with you, making you doubt your own thoughts, is a form of suffering, isn't it? We may label it anxiety or stress or even upset, angry, happy, joyful. They're all states of viewing self. Viewing with Buddha mind transcends all of that. How the hell do you do that? Well, this is Buddhism. And if you study it thoroughly, you'll understand that even with all the words and the stories and the example, ultimately, everything is pointing you in the same direction. You need to alter your idea of what your very mind is doing, because your ego mind, constructed on your idea of self, has profoundly limited your full experience of this life. So we don't want to annihilate that. It's all good. It's real around you, in you. But let's detach it from its fake anchors. That reality isn't real. That reality is totally constructed. This is the main essence of the teaching. That's why you hear it throughout all of the teachings for thousands of years, albeit in different ways from different camps, talking to different audiences. It's about those anchors, those real things that actually are, what would Nagarjuna say? Empty. You're trying to hug air. Might feel good for a moment, but ultimately not satisfying. So let's transcend that whole mechanism of self and ego, which wants to hold it together no matter what. And let's create an ego that's open, that's constantly reviewing in terms of understanding the nature of change, which is ongoing, every single moment. Change, transit, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. Actually, birth, death, birth, death, birth, death. Language. And now your 7-year-old is coloring. And your 12-year-old is looking at you like, wow. I'm not sure she gets it, but she's interested. The 7-year-old tuned you out paragraphs ago. But use that analogy of having children. We're awestruck when we watch our child grow because we can see this very process. Oh, I could see you in him. No, I don't see myself in him at all. Oh, he just had a moment of me. Right? That's how we talk in our ego self on earth. We watch our child grow and we distinguish parts of that child's growth, evolution into a being, an ego being, and we can point to that child's influences, but we don't see it as we're influencing the child in this way. We have the ego that says, oh, he had this in him. He's showing me through him. That's the ego at work, preserving that idea of self. You're so important. In reality, we watch the child do a lot of stuff that we have no real recognition of. We just keep trying to fit it into the peg of what we want to see. It's a big machine, this identity thing. It's always at work. That's why it's so hard to push it out of the way. We don't want to kill it off. It's part of who we are. But we want it to stand aside. Watch this, me. What was that? Do it again. It's not mystical. It's very, very real. Our children, truly, if you watch them for any length of time, are extremely humbling. Because we can't help at some point, not everyone does this, but I think most parents watch their children very self-reflexively. And by that I mean not just labeling the child has your behavior when it comes to this and your behavior when it comes to that. It's the child's behavior. Stop identifying yourself with your child. It is a separate entity. It demonstrates things that are familiar with you that you've stocked up as your idea of self, and your ego is so willing to take that idea of self and transpose it onto your child. But the child's just enacting its own karma. And you're picking and choosing what you can identify with it. Let it free. Watch what it does, when it does, and be awestruck by it. Maybe it seems familiar. Great, but it's not yours. Advice to parents. Let your children amaze you. Let them. And when you see something similar, you can celebrate it, but not because it's yours, but because it's similar. Also, when you see that similarity and you smile, also wonder about what that says about your relationship with the child. I know that's being very self-critical, but many doors will open. And take that to Gohonzon. Take that to your Butsudan and your mandala and chant Namo Myo Renge Kyo and see what else opens for you and the child. Be amazed, as we should be, every single moment of every day. Namo Myo Renge Kyo. Thanks for listening. I'll close on this. We're still talking about the 3,000 realms. We're still talking about the 12 gates and Nagarjuna, Chi, Miaolo, Dengyo, Nichiren, all great bodhisattva teachers trying to get us to settle around this idea that all we need do, apart from observation in samsara, is to reconnect with our Buddha mind. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. It's so simple. But it's so simple that sometimes we get lazy about it. And we can't. We have to approach this mandala every time we approach it with sincere strength, conviction, and resolve. This is going to change whatever I'm going through. This is going to influence me in a glorious, amazing way. I let go of the idea that I know what that is. Because if I knew what that was, I wouldn't need to do this. I'd be a Buddha. Damn your ego. It's a control freak. Put it aside. Surrender to your enlightenment. Not sure about using that word, but surrender, I mean. But truly, it is a sort of a letting go of predetermined ideation. But even with that, take your ego and go, ha, go on, son. Challenge it. Because that's the kind of ichinen, the kind of will, the kind of volition that your Buddha mind needs to hear. This is what Nichiren talks about when he talks about earthly desires are enlightenment. Because the desires aren't bad, they're motivation. And that motivation to open your Buddha mind with Myoho Renge Kyo will instantiate the wonder of what this reality really is. All right, lots of words. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your support. Jonathan, I'm talking to you, and I'm talking to all of you, all of your support as patrons, as individual contributors. Reggie, the candle you sent me was amazing. Download the podcasts. Like and share. Subscribe. All these things are bodhisattva efforts to grow this sangha. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. I'm so grateful and proud of your practice. Keep it going, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.